All right. Well, hey, again, we really appreciate you being here.
Sure.
So let's see. The first question isn't so much an atheistic question as it is a science question, which really they obviously tie in together. In this country, there's a huge fear by a lot of people of science. And I'm wondering, why do you think that is? Why do you feel that people have a fear of science?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. I think science forces us to confront our conventional views of reality and often change our minds. And I think that for many people that's terrifying, that people come to believe certain things and they feel comfortable, and going outside their comfort zone is something that is not natural for anyone. And I think one of the things that science does is train us to be prepared to go outside our comfort zone, to be prepared to confront our prejudices and biases and be willing to be wrong. So I think that's part of it. I think there's also for many people a fear of the unknown, and I think of not knowing. Science is really based on being willing to say, I don't know the answer. There's a mystery, and I'm willing to accept that mystery and trying to discover it, but not feel that I need to invent some explanation to make me feel good. And of course, the fact that what science has told us is that the universe doesn't make us very special. It doesn't place us at the center. The universe doesn't care whether good things or bad things happen to us. Again, many people I think like to think that somehow the universe is taking care of them. It gives them a kind of comfort, and I can certainly understand that. And finally, I do think we have to recognize that for many people in churches around the country, many people are told that science is incompatible with their belief in a God, and therefore science must be wrong, and that's unfortunate. Even the famous Christian theologian St. Augustine said that basically the Bible isn't a scientific document, and as Moses Maimonides once said, he would have argued that the scriptures are absolutely true, but if your interpretation of the scriptures disagrees with the results of science, then you should re-examine your interpretation of the scriptures. And for those people who are told that the results of the way the world really works are incompatible with their belief in a specific deity, they have to re-examine those beliefs, and rather than say we refuse to accept the evidence of reality. So I think you have people who are told that science is the enemy. Science is the enemy of good, of morality, of a whole bunch of things, because that allows people to suspect things like, of course, evolution and the Big Bang, etc. So you have people actively working against science. At the same time, we have a natural tendency to want to feel comfortable in our own beliefs. There's a long answer to your question, and rambling, but maybe I covered various things.
Now, you once said that most scientists don't even think enough about God to even realize they are atheists. I think that's a great quote, and I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but just, from your background, obviously you know about this. Some Christians don't like that.
I think I borrowed that quote from a friend and colleague and Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Steven Weinberg, who also happens to be an atheist. But the point is that there are groups, like the Templeton Foundation and other groups, that try to suggest that somehow this question of God and science is a pressing one that scientists worry about and deal with. And in fact, it doesn't happen at all. I've been a physicist for over 40 years, and I've never heard the word God mentioned at a scientific meeting. It's irrelevant because we try and understand the way the world works by exploring it and discovering the rules that govern physical phenomena and trying to work backwards and look for evidence and try and answer empirically fundamental questions about nature. And we don't resort to supernatural explanations that really make no predictive power whatsoever. So the point is that this question of science confronting God may be important to a lot of people, but it's not important to scientists, even religious scientists.
Right.
Dispense with God when they go into the laboratory. As a very famous biologist, whose name I forget right now, but Haldane, I think, once said, when I go into the laboratory, I become an atheist. I don't assume there's some invisible hand twisting the dials in my apparatus. And he said, if I'm that way in the laboratory, why shouldn't I be that way outside the laboratory? So the point is that this question of God becomes irrelevant. And God is irrelevant when it comes to understanding the physical world. And that's only the case because we've discovered that we don't need supernatural explanations. If we did, of course, God wouldn't be irrelevant. If we couldn't understand the way stars work without some invisible hand of God making things happen, then that would be important. But we've been able to understand the universe right back to the earliest moments of the Big Bang without any need to invoke supernatural shenanigans, and therefore God becomes irrelevant. Right. The whole question, it's not worth time. There's not worth spending time on because such a God, if it existed, would be impotent and irrelevant and redundant.
Right. Traveling around the country as you have, and meeting with different people and listening to these debates and all of this different stuff. I'm sure you've heard a lot of these, but if you were asked to pinpoint what you thought might be the craziest argument you've ever heard in support of the existence of God, what would jump out in your mind?
Oh, let me think.
I know there are some doozies. It's hard maybe to know
hard to list levels of craziness. I tend to try and dispense with the crazy ones.
Right.
Let me see. Well, I think that I've heard people. I guess there are obvious. I mean, they're the standard crazy arguments for why there must be God. Because evolution could never work, and all those things, those arguments. And I think I have to say the craziest arguments. Well, let me say there's two sets. There's ones that confront science. So I've heard people say that the kind of science I do requires there to be a God, that the universe is fine-tuned for life, and therefore there must be a God. Well, in fact, the universe isn't fine-tuned for life. I mean, a lot of people who are theologians or think theologically and try and pretend that science supports the notion of God will argue that the universe is fine-tuned so we can be here. Well, the universe is. There are many aspects of the universe that are strange and unusual that we don't understand. But as I've often said, lack of understanding isn't evidence for God; it's evidence for lack of understanding.
Right.
But in particular, the universe isn't fine-tuned for life. Most of the universe is quite uninhabitable, and in many ways, the universe is trying to kill us every single day. It's amazing we're still here. And certain key factors of the universe are very unusual, like the fact that the energy of empty space isn't zero, but very small. Some people have argued, well, that's evidence of God because it was much bigger than humans could, then galaxies wouldn't have formed, and all the rest. But they don't seem to realize that if empty space had zero energy, the universe would be better tuned for life. But that's not the case. So even these silly arguments about fine tuning that are used to try and justify the existence of God do exactly the opposite.
Right.
There's no evidence. There's no evidence in the universe that the universe is designed so that we can be in it. In fact, as I described in my latest book, the universe we experience is actually an accident, just like icicles on a window. So that's a scientific version. I have to say, at a more human level, I find it sad when there's a disaster, and I hear people say, "I was saved. God saved me from that disaster." But they don't seem to realize that God didn't save all the other people.
Right.
And so it's the same kind of myopic view that I think that God is looking out for you personally. And that's what many people like God. They think I have a personal relationship with God, but they don't seem to realize that would imply that God doesn't care about all the other people, the children that die. And so those arguments I find tragic.
Even better than that, really, is when they say things like a Bible survived a fire, but everybody else died, but they think it's a miracle because the Bible survived. And that's the one that's always blown my mind.
Well, I know that's true, but people look for things, and this is a big part of science. They assume that things that happen to them are significant. Right. When in fact, most things that happen to you are just random. And the physicist Richard Feynman used to like to emphasize that. Go up to people and say, "You won't believe what happened to me today. You won't believe what happened." And they'd say, "What?" And you say, "Absolutely nothing." Because you can have a million crazy dreams, and then one night you'll dream a friend broke their arm, the next day you discover they broke their leg, and somehow you think there's significance. So sure, the universe is big and old, and strange things happen all the time.